Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Hey there, it's Zoe Routh, your friendly neighborhood Canadian, Australian leadership futurist. And rarely is it in a conversation that I have an entire paradigm, my entire understanding of a topic and worldview upended by a guest. And this is what happens on this episode in this conversation. My guest today is the remarkable Samantha Slade. She is also Canadian, and at the time of this interview, she was running programs in Australia. She is the author of Get Horizontal, and she's the co-founder of Percolab, a collaborative organization that is non-hierarchical in nature. And in this conversation, we dive deeply into the ins and outs and challenges and solutions of what it means to run a non-hierarchical organization that is caring and collective by nature. And I threw all the big guns at her. Well, I thought they were big guns anyway, in terms of my questions about how can a collective decision-making organization, a collaborative one, actually work and operate? What about all these human nature challenges? And Sam quite beautifully explains how our better nature is the one that saves the day. It's a remarkable conversation. I do hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. Well, all the way from Montreal, but now in Australia, welcome to the show, Samantha Slade.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited to talk with you. And we had some really cool connections. We both went to McGill, possibly overlapping in 1988, all those eons ago. And we both lived in Montreal. Boy, I think you live in Montreal now. Isn't that right?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And where are you in Australia during your month-long visit?
Well, I'm currently in Southern Shoalhaven, where we've been doing some first trainings here, and I'll be going to Brisbane tomorrow and then on to Sydney and then back to Southern Shoalhaven.
Beautiful. Well, you're seeing some nice parts of the country at a good time of the year. It's not too hot. It's not too stinking hot. Usually February can be pretty brutal, so hopefully it's going to treat you well. And more to the point, though, you're going to treat us well with all the fantastic insights. I've been hankering to hear your solutions to some of the challenges I've been wrestling with for a couple of years now when it comes to horizontal organizations, non-hierarchical organizations, and collaboration. So first big question, though, how did you actually get into this line of work?
It's such a great question. My background is cultural anthropology. That's the McGill connection that we have. And I took a year off my studies when I was at university because I was like, there's a lot of stuff we're learning in the books, but how does all of this land in the real world? And there was a revolution going on in Nicaragua at that time in the 1980s. And I just thought, what if I take a year off and I go and experience a revolution firsthand? It's, being young and a little naive. So off I went for a year. I wanted to see it and feel it with my hands, like this word revolution I was hearing about in my classroom. I wanted to, it was kind of a unique opportunity. So off I went.
Wait a minute. Did you not think that was going to be dangerous and scary?
Perhaps, but I just went anyways.
Oh my God.
And it was like this crazy experience because what I witnessed was like at the level of a country living an experiment of a different way of organizing, going, this is the way we organized in the past, and this is the way we're going to organize now. And so without putting any judgment on that, what it did is it really opened my eyes to we human beings design the systems we live in. They're our choice. We create them. We choose to maintain them, and we can change them at any time. It really hit home during that experience that I had. And then during those travels, I had a personal experience firsthand that really came and also made me aware that human beings can actually be quite extractive, one with the other, transactional and extractive. I had a strange experience of being kidnapped for a day. I was fine. Everything was good, but it was just for a day. And in that day, I was, a price was put on me, and I was put on a market, and I was meant to be sold, but I managed to escape. And the reason I escaped is really thanks to this like 11 or 12-year-old young boy who was entrusted with locking the door before the transaction was going to take place. And he looked me in the eyes, and he looked at my backpack, and he was like, "This is your chance for freedom." And I ran, and I am who I am today and where I am today. And a lot thanks to that little young boy who had such courageous leadership. And he's been my inspiration for leadership ever since. And that experience has given me, like, it's in my body now. I know how awful it can be, the opposite of shared leadership and caring and all these humane ways of functioning together. I know what the opposite is when we go to the full extreme of extractive transactional ways of being with human beings, where you're nothing but an object on a market.
Oh my God.
So yeah, all of that's in my history. So when I left the Ministry of Education work I was doing, I'd been in education for 16 years and like jumped ship and started a business 15 years ago, Percolab Co-op. And I really started it as a business that was going to be very intentionally a place where people could be in their autonomy and their creativity and their potential. But what I discovered is what a lot of people discover is that even though you're a founder and a director and you desire that, it doesn't happen, because desiring it is not enough. You have to create the alternate system that creates the conditions for people to step into that. You can't just go, this one system, we're going to shut it down and expect people to, in the emptiness, to reimagine themselves. You have to co-create another system that is based on different principles and values.
All right. And we're going to definitely dig into that. I'm still caught up in, I got kidnapped and almost got sold into slavery. So
yes.
Can we just rewind a little bit to that point? Because I think that's kind of like landing like a bomb inside my head. When you were sitting in that, I mean, you walked through a door, a literal and metaphorical door at that point, through the virtue of this young boy making a decision, a leadership choice to set you free. So just because I want to know what the alternative was going to be, you were going to be sold into slavery for human trafficking? Is that what you anticipated?
I was going to be sold as somebody's wife.
So a sexual slave.
Yeah. And I was told that I should just cooperate. It was in my interest to cooperate. If I didn't cooperate, I was going to be killed. I understood that. And so, yeah, those were my options, either cooperate or be killed and basically lose my freedom. And yeah, that's basically what it was. And so then they had different people come in and priced me, and yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That is so intense. Okay. Horrible.
Human trafficking is a huge international problem, and we don't talk about it very much.
Well,
yeah, that's not what we're here for today. But from your question, where does all of this come? It is part of my story, and it puts the fire in my belly. And more about that young boy and what he did is, yeah.
What was at stake for him in making that choice?
Probably a lot. That's why I'll be forever grateful for him. And I don't know what happened to him thereafter. Yeah, he was in service of humanity, was what he was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just huge when you're 11.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Last question on this, and then we're going to dive into the lessons learned and applied and how we can expand the betterment of humanity as a result. Mm-hmm. How did you escape? So he opened the door and you ran? Where did you run?
I ran out into the street. There was a market. I was screaming.
Oh, okay.
That was it. Once I was in public space, I was safe.
Okay, because I thought maybe you were in some tropical forest somewhere.
No, it was it's like a trap in a hotel. When you go to rent your room at a hotel, it's actually organized crime.
Oh my God. Okay.
I was at the wrong place, wrong time. That's all.
Are you still attracted to going to places where they're having revolutions?
It's funny because I live in Quebec, where we talk about it's a place of the quiet revolution. But I do think that where we are in our world today requires us to be really committed to some serious change at so many levels, namely within ourselves, within the places we work and everywhere. We call that a revolution or not. I mean, I think it's a big word. It's a scary word, but it's definitely deep change is required.
I think that is exactly to the point. Deep change is required. I was telling you before we hit record that last year I did a series on holacracy. And I was wrestling with it. I'm like, I don't know if this thing can actually really work. And because it requires so much development in the humans, let alone creating a new system, and it's something that you mentioned just previously, just then, was that we need to create the conditions that allow it to emerge and to be successful. So, God, where do we start? So your book is called Get Horizontal. It's all about creating non-hierarchical organizations that are collaborative and inclusive. What are the conditions that we need? What is the deep work that we need to do in order to create the conditions to allow this to emerge?
When I wrote Going Horizontal and it came out in 2018, and since then I've been supporting teams and organizations in Canada, across the world, in their work to find their way to, I don't know, we can call it healthy collaboration. We can call it sharing leadership, whatever you want to call it. The term doesn't really matter, being teal, whatever. And it took me a while, but what I started realizing is that I was listening out for the quality of listening in an organization or a team. And I began to realize that underneath it all, if we can't listen to each other, it's difficult to create something where we are co-responsible and in something together if we can't even have the basic element of quality listening of each other. And it's in our human nature to listen to each other. And if we go back to traditional cultures throughout the world, or indigenous cultures and worldviews and knowledge systems today, listening has always been there, with the circle of the way of human beings showing up, it's there. And somehow in our busyness or our way of understanding being professional, we trip over each other, and we've got a little disconnected from our innate capacity to be good listeners with one another. And this does bring us back to that.
You think there's an innate capacity to be good listeners, whereas a lot of the research and reading I do is you got to learn how to do it. So in fact, throughout your book, Get Horizontal, you talk about our innate abilities in a number of different areas.
Yes. In Going Horizontal, the reason why I will always come back to it's in our human nature to do things this way is my background in cultural anthropology. So when you look at it from that perspective, it depends how long back we're looking. So if you go to pre-industrialization and you go to traditional cultures and knowledge systems and ways of functioning, we know how to be together. It's already been figured out. We know that human beings have propensity for some dysfunctional behaviors. And in traditional systems, we would put up ways of holding us to our better selves, right? So in the language, in the culture, in the rituals, everything was there. And people worked in togetherness with care for the collective beyond the individual. So if we move forward to more recent, the very short history of humanity, because that's very short, if we go from industrialism, or then we get thinking that it's built on assumptions of human beings are self-interested, and so we need to manage them because we can't trust them. Some human beings are better than others, or even superior to others. These things infiltrate into it. They've come from us with the history of colonialism, and they have a legacy of it in the organizations that we live in today. And so it is interesting because part of what we're doing when we are learning to collaborate better, we're actually in a place of letting go of an old paradigm and reconnecting with a paradigm of togetherness, interdependence, care, collective. That's the paradigm that's in us that we reconnect with when we go into this healthy collaboration. And it's confusing because really, I believe that where we are in the world today is we've kind of got one foot in this kind of dominant system, a way of functioning, and even considering to be a good professional. and another foot saying, oh, we really got to take care of mental health, and we really got to take care of our self-care and our togetherness, and bringing the human in the workplace. And we're thinking about all of that, and we're standing between two paradigms, not necessarily consciously, but we're feeling it. It feels a little bit crazy. And mostly everybody I know is in that space. And we're in a kind of a collective trying to figure out how organizations can function. And I don't really know where this is going to land, where it's all going to go, but it's definitely somewhere where we talk about collaboration, and I'm putting it in quotes, as being the essential piece. But it's really bringing us back to, sometimes I call it social practices of togetherness. And they're in us. And we come back to being able to trust our fellow human beings, to be able to go, oh, it doesn't have to be based on what I prefer and everybody doing my thing, but in service of a collective purpose. And so we recalibrate based on what we're doing collectively in the collective purpose. And that all sounds good and easy, and most people are in agreement with it. But when we come to doing it, we get confused with like practices and operational business processes that are actually born from another paradigm that is not in caring, healthy collaboration space. So that's a little bit of the mess that we're in, I would say.
Hey, it's Zoe. If you're enjoying these leadership insights, join us in the Amplifiers Academy. It's bite-sized leadership development through self-paced videos and exercises, templates, checklists, resources, and an online community to connect with other leaders. It's Amplifiers Academy, your gateway to better, stronger leadership. See you there. Samantha, that was one of the most original insights I've ever had on the show about how we got to where we're going. And it's like rewind or revisiting this whole idea of past paradigms and reinventing them. And I think that's quite fascinating. Your assertion as an anthropologist that we've had these practices previously and we're trying to reconnect with them. And if I heard you correctly, Samantha, is that the advent of the Industrial Revolution and prior to that, colonialism, and the expansion of empires, that's when we sort of left it behind, or we might have left it behind before that, I think.
Yeah.
Potentially. So this whole idea, okay. I have my head exploding with connections happening right now. So I'm just going to pick out one of the threads. So yes, we're caught between two paradigms and we're trying to figure out how they got to this mess and how do we tease it all out. One of the questions I had for you is this whole idea of status. And at the beginning of your book, you talk about one of the practices that we had as humans was to be non-hierarchical by nature. And this conflicts with a lot of the contemporary modern neuroscience research, which talks about status as one of our social threat triggers. So I'm curious, which is it? Do we have status threats? How does that fit with the non-hierarchical aspect of our past humanity? What's your take on that?
So I have two things to share about this. So first of all, it's interesting because we frame it as a loss when we go to a non-hierarchical way. So as a business person who founded my own business, and I went and shifted from a business where I was the co-director to one where we're all together running the business, I had my own little, in my imagination, there was things I was going to lose, but in my experience, in the real experience, the gain, I didn't see the gain I was going to get. I only, through the experience, I lived it. And I can give you the example of that gain when during COVID, within 1 week, all of our contracts were canceled within a single week. Like, it's a terrifying moment for a business, right?
It's horrible.
We met as a team, not with everybody looking at Samantha going, what are we going to do? What's the answer? We met a team with the question in the middle going, what are we going to do? And I looked at that moment and I was like, this is not on my shoulders. It's a shared responsibility. And thank goodness we are in this non-hierarchical space so we can all hold a little bit of that question together, because I can't imagine how it must have been for those executives who had that on their shoulders to take care of all the people. And it's just, it's incredible. So there's gain from it. There's gain. And with shared responsibility, it takes a load off. It's like we carry the load together, and that's just phenomenal. And the second thing I want to say is I have the good fortune of working with some Indigenous communities and organizations. And one of the things that we've been talking about is this word chief, right? And so chief in Western world, we think of chief as a status term, right? And when, the settlers came and tried to figure out and make sense of the cultures that they were meeting from the Indigenous communities, they looked at the role the chief had in the community and they put status on it. And one of the things I've been working with Indigenous organizations who are themselves in a process of decolonizing themselves from the legacy organizational ways that they've inherited, and they're trying to find their way home as well, is that the chief had a role in the community, which was one of the many roles, and they all matter. It's not like one is more important. It's like all of these roles together make a healthy community. It's the eyes of the Europeans who came and think and functioned hierarchically enough that they could just take the land and whatnot and all that with it, that projected onto it the chief as hierarchy. These are some of the conversations we're having as we unravel that. And it's really funny. So this woman that I talk about with it, it's really great because she's called her son Chief. And so it just kind of cuts through the whole thing. Every time we're having a Zoom and she talks about her son, it just makes me smile because it really does cut through it. And this whole status thing is something that's part of an old paradigm in which we don't all matter. Like, it's not just human beings that matter. It's also the other than human beings that matter. And that's what has gotten us to the place where we are, where we're actually destroying the planet that we're living on because we think we matter more, right? And so, yeah, that's like a rebalancing is an invitation here.
I'm wondering now, as you speak, that the neuroscience research has identified these threats through a hierarchical lens.
This is all what I would call hierarchically biased research.
Yeah.
We have a term called two-eyed seeing, and it is an Indigenous academic who created this term and said there's actually two ways of doing scientific research. And if you're informed by an Indigenous lens, it's a different kind of research. Indigenous communities have been scientifically observing nature and interconnections in human beings for thousands of years and transferring that knowledge and wisdom on. And so this idea of two-eyed seeing is looking at both Western forms of science and non-Western forms of science. It's quite interesting. And so when we quote science, my reflex is to go, what would be the two-eyed seeing other perspective on that?
Wow. Okay. So this moves to my next question on similar lines. So if status is a Western colonial way of looking at groups and roles, along lines of that is the whole idea of fairness and equitable sharing. So this speaks to also the logistics of, if we're going to go to a non-hierarchical collaborative organization and we're looking at transparency as one of the tenets of that, and we're talking about how we pay people, say, for example, fairness is definitely one of those triggers identified, as I said, by David Rock in particular in his research. So how do we contend with this whole notion of fairness? What's the two-eyed way of looking at fairness?
So I love that we're bringing up like salaries, but honestly, when we're doing a process of going horizontal in organizations, we don't necessarily start there. Like, you've got to build
I can imagine that you would, yeah.
Listening is a good place to start, and salaries and how money is organized is a good way to build up towards. And, because that takes a while, because you're really shifting paradigms. And as soon as you talk about money, you're going into people's real, a place of, visceral safety. So you got to be timely around that. I have seen some organizations jump to it and have like a certain kind of experiences that are always rich, but, can be a little bit turbulent at the same time. So I would go with starting with fairness, something so micro as just how we are running our meetings. Like, how we run our meetings doesn't represent fairness in voice, fairness in power, fairness in distribution of time. It doesn't necessarily, and often I say, if you want to know how an organization is running and the paradigms it's in, all you got to do is just have a look at how its meetings take place. It's basically a reflection of that. And so there are ways to run meetings with shared responsibility. I mean, and I often bring this in as it's such a tiny thing, and yet it's so transformative for an organization. And it's such a low risk place of making a change, right? Your internal meetings. Just having something where, not just that whoever's the conventional term is chairing them. I like to use the word hosting them. It brings a different spirit to it, right? So whoever's hosting the meetings is rotating, but beyond that, having a different, and I always come back to it. It's not throwing out the current meeting structure. It's shifting the meeting and evolving the meeting structure to one that's a little bit more conscious around these fairness issues. So in our meetings, for example, at Percolab, when our agenda is co-created, and if I put a point on the agenda, I need to say, this is a point that Samantha will be hosting, leading, facilitating, right? And that in this point, I would like to take X number of minutes from the shared number of minutes that are attributed to the meeting. So it's inviting me into consciousness. I'd like 20 minutes of the amount of minutes we have in this meeting. And I'm invited to think about what I will be asking of my colleagues and like how I will be inviting them to contribute. So we have 4 types of contributions of colleagues. One is that they just listen and receive. The other is that they give feedback. The other is that they co-create with me. And the other is that we decide together. And so by having a little typology, by having this kind of framework of whoever brings it is going to be, hosting it and leading it, it shifts entirely a meeting culture into one that we're holding together. And the same goes for proposals. Where's the fairness in the proposals coming in the organization? There's so much that you can work on for fairness, but the very baseline of that is just like voice, like how is fairness in voice? And so having something where you've got a little bit of, I'm going to come back to the circle a lot because it's not circle from a place of therapy, it's circle from just a basic organizational structure that tends to this idea of everybody has an opportunity to be heard. And so working with the structure of circle in meetings or in teams or whatever's going on, it helps to say this person is spoken to and they know nobody will respond and there will be no conversation launched. It'll go from this person to the next person to the next person to the next person. That kind of structure builds in, a culture of thinking about fairness differently. And that builds the muscles to then build up and talk about fairer ways of functioning with the money. And there's so many practices around that. I mean, we could have a whole hour just on that. At Percolab, our financial practice is called compensation with conversation. And we bring in something that's very fine-tuned, even fun. If once you've done it a bit, it's a bit terrifying at first and then can be enjoyable afterwards, but really has fairness and care as the 2 baseline principles of how we distribute money together.
Wow. And you said compensation with conversation.
Yes.
Does that mean collective conversation about how the funds are allocated?
Yeah. So we have a protocol we follow. It's not like a random conversation. It's a strict protocol that over, I would say, like almost a decade of applied research has helped us understand that, there are healthy ways of talking about money and learning to trust each other around money. And when we move to these more horizontal ways, we can slowly build up to them if it's appropriate. It's not appropriate for all organizations to do it. And I think it's really important for people to understand this isn't like a fixed system and we're all working or trying to get to a same point. It's like every organization has its own context. And it's such an emerging field that going horizontal is basically illuminating 7 domains of practice that are common to all organizations, that all organizations can begin working on as they develop their awareness and practices from a paradigm of collaborative, caring, collective.
So around fairness then, It doesn't necessarily mean equal, or does it?
Absolutely not. That's the baseline. We doesn't have to, I would say, like, at one point, there's a stage that an organization can go through that thinks that, to be fair, we're all just going to distribute it equally. It can be a nice idea, and with time, you can see that maybe that's not going to deal with all the issues at hand. There's so much more complexity afoot when we're dealing with fairness, especially when it comes to money, that it's almost a way of avoiding going into the complexity by saying we're all just going to have the same. When I'm with a group and we're trying to distribute and divvy something up, I can see the reflex of saying, well, let's be fair and everybody have the same amount. And it's like, it feels like it's an easy out from going into the real complexity. And I understand, but we want that easy out because we don't necessarily have protocols and practices to go into that place of complexity around fairness. It's really, this got so much attached to it. And so I make it a point of helping organizations experience protocols from which they can actually have an experiential in their body go, oh, that's what it can look like, and that's what it might feel like. I even have a course that we've developed called Practical Conscious Economics for the Workplace. And in this course, we go into different themes and live the experiences of it. And it's always the two principles we're striving for is fairness, which is not necessarily equal, and caring, which can take all sorts of different forms.
Wow. Okay. That's huge insight there. And I think that's really important for people to understand. And the way that I like to think about fairness doesn't always mean equal is we revisit primal times, tribes living on a plain, say, for example, everybody has a different role. If you're divvying up the resources, let's say the beast that you've hunted and slaughtered, who gets how much of the beast in terms of feeding? And it's often like the discussion around this, and I'm not an anthropologist, so if I'm making a mistake here, you can tell me, is that, okay, how you allocate it is to who needs the most calories to do the work that they need to do. So often the hunters would get the biggest piece of the animal that they've cooked or slaughtered so they could have enough energy to go out and do it all over again to feed the tribe. And so that's the way that fairness got divvied out. It's more what's equitable as opposed to what's equal. Is that an okay analogy, or have I got it wrong?
It's good enough. But I think what's important to say is that we've somehow in our dominant system, we've come to think that it's normal that I'm just looking out for myself. And so I'm individually focused. How, good am I at negotiating my salary? It's a very different thing for a group of people to go, this is the budget of our organization. This is the budget that we're putting towards salaries this year. And how are we going to organize that? And so now I'm not saying just me and what I get from that pie. I'm invited to go, ooh, what would I like to have as a minimum or a maximum from that pie? So I'm thinking consciously for myself. And how much do I think this colleague and that colleague? And it's entirely different type of perspective because it's coming from collective. And if I just go back to the hunter analogy for one moment, like one of the things that is in a lot of traditional communities is the hunter doesn't get like adulated as the superhero of the community. They actually get a little bit just like, yeah, whatever, you hunted today, so that it keeps the ego in check. So there's actual practices that deliberately, these are cultural practices that keep the ego in check. We're far from that. Our culture is like all about uplifting the ego, right? And the idea of coming back and giving value and priority to the collective this is where I think working in more horizontal ways, it leads us eventually.
My next question is around power.
Mm-hmm.
And so the model that's sort of sitting in front of my brain right now is integral leadership development, which says a natural, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, curious on your take on that, a natural hierarchy where the different integral practices have mapped out development of human values in both communities and individuals, and ego leadership maturity in terms of how we go through different stages. And across all the different models, from spiral dynamics to leadership maturity, there's this element of, well, in spiral dynamics, it's the red zone, the primal power zone. And in ego leadership maturity, it's, I think, sort of around the rise of the expert. And, well, it might be opportunist as well. But it's all about wrestling with this whole idea of power over others. And this is something that needs to be dismantled or dealt with in a way if we're going to have horizontal organizations, collaborative, non-hierarchical organizations. So how do we deal with this notion of power? And I guess, is this a two eyes way of seeing thing that needs to be redone here?
There's so much to say about this. So first of all, I think when we say the word power, different people are hearing it in different ways. So some people, the image that's coming to their mind is one of a pie that gets divvied up. So if I get more, then you get less. And if you get more, then I get less, right? So this idea is it's like a fixed amount. There's a bit of scarcity. So I've got anxiety. I get to be clambering in, take my place, all of that. And from all of that comes, developing skills of influence to get a bigger piece of the pie, right? The other image that can come to other people's minds is one of power is just abundant. Like it's never ending resource. It's not because I'm stepping into my power that you have any less. It's not at all. There is no fixed pie that is being divvied up. It's in abundance. And then if I go back to the two-eyed seeing, I could see my Salish Indigenous friends who are quiet when I say to them, oh, what do you think about shared power, that term? And they both go very quiet. And I ask them why they're being quiet. And they say to me, for us, power is not something you want to be scrambling after. Power is a creator. And it's almost like a discomfort, because if you're hungering after power, you're back to being too self-focused, self-interested, individualistic hoarding, and all of that, which is counter to the collective well-being of the community. It's really interesting, this. And so just unpacking what are our, belief systems around power that we're not even necessarily conscious of is like an interesting first element. And then thinking, I like to talk about shared power, even if it makes my friends April and Erica a little uncomfortable. But, thinking of shared power, we're in it together, and that each individual is stepping into to your singular powers and strength. And it really changes when we start looking at things like that. It's not about influencing and taking from and having over the others. It's a complete shift. But to do that, you need really structured practices. My favorite one of them, and I'm sure you're familiar with this if you've been around holacracy, is the way we do consent-based decision making. And it's a real way where everybody is invited in to have a voice, and it's no longer whoever has the strongest voice who's going to be dominating a group to have the decision that's made based upon their personal preference. You're putting that aside, and you're able to go, what are we collectively trying to do here? What makes sense for the good of this situation, the organization, the product, the whatever? And it completely shifts everything. And power, once you start to be held by practices like that, you just show up differently in power. It helps for you to shift out of that dominant paradigm of around coercion with power to a different paradigm of caring for each other and the collective purpose with power.
I think part of the challenge, and you named it up front anyway at the beginning, is that we're between two paradigms, and the caring and collective is a completely old/new, a revisiting of an old paradigm that is emerging in a new form, obviously with new social conditions and new technologies, etc. And to let go of one set of values and understanding of the world and embrace another is a massive developmental leap. How do we create the conditions to allow it? You mentioned listening, deep listening, and being able to do that. You've talked about having a look at our meetings and how we run meetings. That's a structural thing. And we've talked about redefining what power is and how it looks like, and having these core values of caring and collective being central to that. How else can we create conditions to allow people to flourish in this environment and let go of some of these legacy things that are holding people back?
So, I mean, one of the things I like to think about is how, when we're hiring somebody and bringing them into an organization, like you're already establishing how that paradigm is showing up, right? Right from hiring and onboarding. So imagine a world, and this is what we do at Percolab, and it's not to say this is a recipe and what everybody needs to do. Each organization has its own, context and way that is a match. So where the idea of hiring and bringing somebody into a team has an impact on all that team. So the team gets to have a voice on the person coming in. And what we do is, no matter how much you've met that person who's going to be joining the team, we invite every single person in a document to say what I appreciate and what is inspiring me about this person, right? And again, it can be whatever it is, and what I'm concerned about this person coming into the team. So you're giving this balance of both appreciative and both kind of honesty with kindness, and you're practicing that. And when the person is hired in Percolab and they come in, the first thing they get in their onboarding is the document where all the colleagues in their team, they get to read the appreciation, inspiration, and the concerns. And they enter a culture of speaking truths with kindness, being appreciative and caring towards each other, saying these are things that people are, intuiting based on the little that they know. So acknowledging that. And this is an accountability practice that we're embedding in from right at the get-go when somebody is onboarded. And so there's no end to where you can start and bring in these practices. But I do invite everyone to think about like how you start a project, how you start a new team when you're doing something new. And of course, hiring and onboarding is one of those spaces. That's where you want to be really, you want to be attentive and intentional and conscious about what is the culture or the expression of a paradigm that we're cultivating here. And so these are creating conditions. By doing that, this inspiration and concerns, we're creating a culture of accountability that's healthy, where we're able to speak truths to each other authentically, efficiently, and kindly. And that's a practice in and of itself. And so we practice right up with the person as they come in. It's not perfect. None of this is perfect, and it might not be easy, but it helps us all become better human beings.
And that speaks a little bit to my next question, Samantha, which is one probably I should have asked up front. Why go horizontal? If we're going to be caring, kind, and better human beings, okay, I can see that. It's a good sales point. Why else go through the effort of going horizontal from wherever you are in your organization, whatever size and etc.? Why go horizontal?
So, of course, the caring and better human beings is one thing. You can make a business case of it, of people are more productive and more engaged. We have the numbers right now of the terrible level of disengagement with employees in the workplace. And I look at it as an expression of a system that's dying in the way we're showing up and inviting people in the workplace. But where I see it even more is the terrible problem of inviting in the new generation into our workplaces, because they're there, they see the world that's not working, and they're seeing this model of working that contributed to creating the multi-problems and crises that we find ourselves in today, and don't want to be part of it. There's something to be said that an organization that's purpose-driven and has such beautiful values and passion, services and products that are really important for the future, for it to be functioning based on the old paradigm makes no sense for me. If you are doing good work in the world, you should be running your organization in a way that is taking care of people from this collaborative, collective, trusting, interdependent paradigm. And it's a journey to just even become aware of that, and then to actually, from that awareness, move forward and do some unlearning, relearning, taking away some business processes and stepping into new processes, from job descriptions to roles, from all of this. It's a journey, and it's an emergent field. And for me, it's full of joy, possibility, and potential for the future. And I really think that the crisis we're in is an invitation to really look at how the organizations and businesses that are part of our world today are an amazing leverage point for co-creating the change that we really want in the world, not just in what the products and services that they give, but also how they function.
Samantha, that is beautiful. And it's finishing where we started in terms of revolution. I can really hear and feel and taste and touch the smells and sounds of revolution in this, or evolution even. And there's opportunities for leaders and their organizations and their teams to evolve and create a revolution along the way. And by goodness, we need it. We need new ways of being and doing and working in the world to address the challenges, as you said, have emerged out of paradigms which we thought were good at the time, but have proven not so good in many counts. There's been some good stuff, and let's contend with the bad stuff. Where can leaders get started? So a tip for okay, we've covered a lot of ground, some big picture stuff. We talked about listening. We talked about having a look at our practices. We talked about meetings. Is there any other first baby step that leaders can take? First question. And the last question is, where can people find out more about you and your work?
So I know that decision-making is a pain point for mostly any organization, group, or team that I speak to. So if you don't know where to start, decision-making is always an easy one, right? To go in, if I ask an organization, what's your decision-making system? What are the spaces? What are the methods? How does somebody who comes in new know where they can contribute, make proposals? In general, it's a non-mapped system that's informally understood. So just mapping your decision-making system and then going out and experiencing consent-based decision-making is a way to kind of shake yourself up a bit and then look at how that might evolve. Because by going to consent-based decision-making, what you get to do is you get to be collective and productive. It's possible the two together. And so we have this myth that it's not possible. And I love people having their discovery that you can have both. So that's, to answer, one way to start is it's there at decision-making beyond all the other little ones that I mentioned. Your other question is, how do they find us? So my organization is called Percolab. You can go to percolab.com and discover. There's all sorts of both accompaniment and training that happens. But one of the things that we offer for free online once a month in English and in French, hopefully other languages soon, is a listen for game. So we've developed a card deck that really helps people who want to up both their listening culture and their capacity to work in a kind of a sense and respond kind of way. It's a game, it takes 15 minutes, and it really develops a core capacity in organizations, and you don't have to do the conventional training. You can experience it for free at Percolab. You'll see, and just sign up and come as many as you want, bring your whole staff, turn up as many as you want. We play it online, and it gives you a real experience of, when I mention quality listening, this is what it looks and feels like. So yes, read the book Going Horizontal, but go and live an experience in which you can start to feel a different kind of future.
Samantha, you're awesome. I just have so enjoyed this conversation, and I've taken you way past what I promised was going to be the length of this conversation. And I do appreciate your time. I know you were in Australia for a month delivering awesome training here, and I'm so glad that we made this happen. Thank you so, so much for the work that you do and for sharing all that you do with the world. Long live la révolution.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you to Campfire Co-op here in Australia, who's invited me to come for the month with my colleague. Look them up because they're holding all the trainings that we're having now with them, and they'll be holding ones thereafter as well. So yeah, vive la révolution.
Oh my goodness. That was an incredible conversation. I didn't want it to end. I had so much more I wanted to explore and tease out in terms of how this paradigm could actually work. And the whole idea of bringing First Peoples' Indigenous culture and heritage and understanding of how humans can be together and live together and work together into modern day practices in a way that highlights our better nature, our caring nature, that is soulful and exciting and wonderful. So I'm taking so much with me from this conversation. In terms of practical application, Definitely how we run meetings and definitely how we do decision making are two of the ways that I'm going to experiment in discussions and conversations with clients. I highly recommend Sam's book, Get Horizontal. It is beautifully written, easy to understand, easy to apply handbook for much of what we talked about today. And it's got really cool little hand-drawn illustrations, which just makes it a really nice read, actually. And it's a fast, easy read, so you can get a copy and use it as your pocketbook go-to on how to be more collaborative, be non-hierarchical, and just be better humans. So if you want to do that, and if you want to do it in the company of like-minded people, consider joining us at Amplifiers. It's where my experienced leaders gather to talk about these big issues and to talk about how we might implement cutting edge or old edge type of thinking in pursuit of a better future. If that sounds like you, go to zoerouth.com, click on Amplifiers, and do join us. If you enjoyed this conversation, you want to get more, you want to know more, you want to ask more questions, hop onto the link that takes us to the Facebook page. Love to hear from you. It makes it more conversational. And I'd love to get more perspectives on this to tease out other ideas about how we can do collaborative work better. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.